Hi, my name is Victoria Swift, and I'm currently taking Women and Gender Studies 200, Women, Culture, and Society. For my biography project for this course, I decided to interview Miss Mary Lynn Hobbs, who is a professor in the Women and Gender Studies Department and the director of the Will Program at the College of New Jersey. I decided to interview Mary Lynn because she was my first Women and Gender Studies professor and has been a feminist mentor to me ever since. I had the pleasure of interviewing Mary Lynn this past November, and here is what I was able to learn about her. Mary Lynn Hobbs grew up in a very small southern town in Louisiana. She reports that there were only about 10,000 people who resided in the town. Although her parents divorced when she was an infant, they were highly involved in the Baptist church. In addition, her father was a federal judge. As a result, Mary Lynn was expected to behave in a very specific and conservative manner, especially as a woman. She was expected to dress and conduct herself in a certain way at all times. However, despite these expectations, Mary Lynn considered herself to be, as she calls, an undercover rebel. Nonetheless, despite her guilt, there were times in which she had to behave in ways she did not agree with. She said, quote, "Growing up in that time, in that culture, I was given a set of rules to follow as a woman. I had to dress and conduct myself in a certain way at all times. There was no fooling around with boys, and girls for that matter. Oh, especially girls. I had to be a lady. There was always a part of me that resisted that, but internally. I wanted to be accepted, so I performed in the way that was expected. I always had a conflict within, but I always did a lot of things I was not supposed to do, too." End quote. Due to her parents' divorce, Mary Lynn spent most of her time with her maternal grandmother, who was president of the PTA and the Red Cross and the editor of a Louisiana newspaper. Her grandmother was her biggest role model. Like her grandmother, Mary Lynn became the president of everything she was a part of. She said, quote, "I got her message." Mary Lynn said that her mother was very different on the other hand. She was the kind of the original steel magnolia, the poster woman for that time. Although she had a degree in history from the University of Arkansas, her mother only taught at an elementary school for 1 year and then became a housewife with servants. Mary Lynn described her as beautiful but very helpless. She said that her grandmother, on the other hand, was not helpless at all, and she could never figure out how her mother grew up with her grandmother. Mary Lynn expressed that her expected role as a woman during the time in which she was coming of age made her uncomfortable. She said, "I played the role of the good girl, the socialite, the successful girl. On the surface, I was this overachieving rich society girl. My first husband described me as someone who could not decide if I was a debutante or a hippie." Mary Lynn explained that a debutante was a woman of upper-class society who had a ball to introduce and present herself into society. Since both of her parents and her grandmother were college graduates, there was no question that Mary Lynn too would attend college. However, it was not encouraged for women at the time to go to college with the ultimate goal of starting a career, but rather to find a husband. Nonetheless, Mary Lynn chose to attend the Newcomb School at Tulane University, which in the 1960s was a college that was very much into preparing women for careers and graduate school. Mary Lynn said, quote, "So the college I was attending was different from what my society was preparing me for, or expected of me. And that's when things started to change. I was a theater major in college, which was another liberating moment for me, because people in theater are outliers already. My friends were rebels like me, in one way or another. We were able to get away with a lot of stuff." This is when Mary Lynn was able to meet other undercover rebels like her and began to question gender roles and relations. She reported, quote, In 1965, I invited some college friends, including Lauren, who was another theater major, to my lake house in Winfield for 4th of July weekend. Lauren brought the guy she was living with, and he began cooking breakfast for her. I was amazed and asked her, "He cooks for you?" And she said, "Oh yes, and he's good in the sack too. The minute he doesn't please me, he's out of here." This was a moment of realization for me because she was the first feminist I had ever met. She never wore a bra either, only band-aids over her nipples. Mary Lynn explained that the term of the time was not feminist, but women's liber. She went to the first National Women's Conference in Houston, Texas in 1977. She has a signed photograph of the woman who organized the conference hanging in her office. I believe the photograph is of Bella Abzug, but I am not entirely sure. Nonetheless, Mary Lynn describes how much she enjoyed the conference by saying, quote, "It was fantastic. I still have the program. This is when I first got involved in the women's movement. I lived at Houston at the time." End quote. I then asked Mary Lynn a series of random questions regarding her experiences and opinions as a feminist. The first question I asked Mary Lynn was how the world has changed in regards to opportunities that young women have now. Mary Lynn immediately expressed that the list is endless. She added, quote, "There is certainly more acceptance of women's success than when I was growing up as a young woman in college. Even though we know it is not where it should be, it is very different from what it was back in the day." I then asked Mary Lynn to describe an experience that made her feel proud to be a woman. I asked to describe an experience that made her feel ashamed or uncomfortable to be a woman as well. Her first response was, quote, "I felt proud to be a woman when I gave birth to my children. It's pretty cool to sustain life, and it's not something men could do." End quote. In regards to my second question, Mary Lynn answered, quote, "I have never been ashamed to be a woman for my actions, but I have been ashamed to be a woman because of other women's actions." However, Mary Lynn quickly added, "I have never wanted to be a man either. I really do like being a woman. It's cool to be a woman." Next, I asked Mary Lynn if she could see one piece of legislation passed or one societal change that would benefit women, what would she choose? And Mary Lynn explained that she thinks women's right to choose should be a constitutional amendment. She would also like to see more government-supported clinics for women's reproductive rights. She said she would choose these legislative/societal changes because, quote, "One of the ways all cultures attempt to control and surpass women is through their bodies." End quote. I then asked Mary Lynn if she thought women and men would ever achieve equal status in this country, and should men and women be treated differently. Her response was, quote, "Not in my lifetime will they be treated equally." But this is a tricky question because what does treated equally mean? Men and women are different, and women should celebrate that difference, but should never be put at disadvantage for those differences. I think that men and women should be treated equally as far as career choices and equal pay. I think women should be given all of the opportunities and advantages that men have historically had. And again, I do not think this will happen in my lifetime. I think one of the barriers to that is what they call patriarchal women. The next question I asked Mary Lynn was, are men and women inherently different? How so? And she said, obviously they are different biologically, they have different levels of hormones. But intellectually, no, there is no difference. Mary Lynn then smiled and added, although women are probably smarter. Finally, I asked Mary Lynn what she believes is her greatest achievement as a feminist. And she replied, quote, "Raising 3 feminist sons. My daughter-in-law tells me that my son is both the most masculine thing and the closest thing to a woman that she knows. Also, I have mentored a lot of young women and encouraged them to think and question things they normally would not. I have also taught my daughter to absolutely know that she can achieve anything that she puts her mind to, and she pretty much has so far. Next, I asked Mary Lynn, what is the one thing she wishes all young women my age and younger should know? And she said, the same thing that I taught my daughter. In other terms, don't ever buy any kind of social BS that says you can't achieve your goals because you are a woman. As I said before, I chose to interview Mary Lynn because she was my first Women and Gender Studies professor at the College of New Jersey. I took her Global Women's Writers class during the second semester of my freshman year. This was the first time I was exposed to feminist ideologies and literature. I remember how unfamiliar the material of the course was to me, and how enlightened I felt while exploring it. At the same time, it all resonated with me. It sounds very ironic, but it's true. I could identify with the border dweller in so many ways. It felt like someone was finally understanding me and how I felt about myself. However, before I took this class with Mary Lynn, I did not have the language to clearly conceptualize my thoughts and feelings. Mary Lynn also helped me outside of the classroom that year. At the time, my grandmother, who was like my second parent, suddenly became very ill. This was the first time I had ever had to deal with her being in the hospital. In addition, this was also my first time being away from home. It was impossible for me to not be by my grandmother's side, so I took the train home quite often to be with her. As a result, I failed to tend to my academics, often missed class, and overall was just a complete mess. I put myself into a hole and was too embarrassed and prideful to ask anyone for sympathy or for their help. However, Mary Lynn understood my situation and gave me a second chance. After our interview, I now know why. Her grandmother meant as much to her as mine means to me. I am sure she completely understood what I was going through and therefore gave me the opportunity to redeem myself. I will forever be grateful for that. What surprised me most about Mary Lynn's responses was her family dynamics and how they are quite similar to my own. My parents also separated while I was an infant, and I too grew up being raised mostly by my maternal grandmother. It was comforting to find out that we have so much in common. I was also very surprised to find out that she attended the first National Women's Conference. Prior to our interview, and for some strange reason, whenever I heard about the first National Women's Conference, I always assumed that it took place much further back in history. When Mary Lynn explained that she attended the conference as a young woman, I was able to realize that it did not take place as long ago as I originally understood. In regards to the topics that we have discussed in class and read in the text, Mary Lynn did touch upon a few of them. She considers her greatest accomplishments as a feminist to be educating young people, including her children, to question and challenge the long-standing social inequalities of gender relations. She made it quite clear that she generally and genuinely believes that women have the right to have the same opportunities and advantages as men in all aspects of life, including employment and when making decisions about their bodies. Although Mary Lynn and I have come to our feminism at very different times, I noticed a lot of similarities in our journeys. In addition, although I think I was only able to skim the surface of her feminist point of view, I do agree with everything she had to say. I agree that although women are biologically different from men, they should be entitled to the same opportunities and advantages as men in all aspects of life. I also agree that these human rights should be protected under the Constitution. Finally, I think it is also just as important to instill feminist ideologies and values in young men as it is in young women. Overall, I was very happy to have had the opportunity to interview Mary Lynn. She has been and continues to be a great feminist mentor. I look forward to having further discussions with her as well as taking her WGS capstone next semester.